Alright. Two ground rules before we really start here, okay? First, and I could just picture this happening. Like, my first 5 comments are going to be, sweet, I can't wait for all your other ruminations. Please keep doing ruminations and stop doing everything else. I am trying to do ruminations. I know it doesn't look like it, but I've actually been working on this video for the last 2 weeks, pretty much every day. So, I am trying, guys. Give me some kind of a break, okay? Please. Second thing, slightly more important. As you guys know, I have this thing I call the war against spoilers, and it's basically impossible, it's literally impossible, to discuss the Kingdom Hearts series without doing spoilers. That's true with many such series. One of the unique aspects of it, though, is that it's usually from one game to the next without regard to the individual. There are some exceptions, of course, but I decided that rather than disallow all spoilers in the comments, which would basically mean nobody could actually talk about the game at all, for all intents and purposes, except for combat, the rule is going to be for this entire series, and I'll mention this in every video. If you want to talk about things that are spoilery or spoil the plot, you may do so within the realms of the game currently being discussed. For example, anyone who wants to mention in the comments anything that might be considered a spoiler for Kingdom Hearts 1 in this video may do so, and, you know, without fear of being deleted or anything like that. Similarly, if I was doing the video of Kingdom Hearts 2 right now, you may talk about Kingdom Hearts 2. However, in this video, you do not discuss anything about what's going to be happening in Kingdom Hearts 2. Alright? You understand where I'm going with this? I've also decided to be slightly more lenient and not actually ban people for spoilers, like I had to do with Assassin's Creed once, and with Star Trek Into Darkness 3 times. But instead, I will be simply deleting your comment. Alright, now that we got all that unpleasantness out of the way, let's talk about some weird stuff, okay? I want to mention this first. Kingdom Hearts 1. Kingdom Hearts may have been one of the very last games that ever came out that had Squaresoft on the cover. Kingdom Hearts came out in March of 2002, and the merger into Square Enix finished, you know, it had already started, but it finished in April 1st, 2003. And yes, I know that the merger thing was starting to happen, you know, prior to that. I know that they'd been working on it for some time, but, the hell? God dang it. Sorry about that. But if you actually look at the cover of the game, which I actually did physically bring out my cover because I wasn't 100% sure of myself on this, it does still say Squaresoft on the cover. And something about that just amuses me. And if you're wondering why you don't know my opinions on the whole Squaresoft, Square Enix, Square crap thing, and that's all we're going to say on the subject. In the hell. Moving on. Kingdom Hearts was a huge risk for, well, both companies actually, Disney and Square both. It came at a time when they were in pretty much severe financial straits. That was the low point as far as their business side of things are going. And Disney hadn't really gotten as hadn't had the upsurge in popularity it was about to have yet, and the company Disney hadn't started eating up other franchises in order to start expanding their own setup, market, demographic, etc. as well either. So it was a pretty risky move on both parts. One of the big reasons why that was a risk was because if you just sit down and think about it on paper, it's one of those ideas that people are either going to react with, wow, that sounds awesome, or that sounds terrible, why would you ever do that? Literally, just think about this for a moment. Just take yourself out of the situation. Ignore the games. Ignore them ever happening, and just think about the thought, okay, we're going to add Disney and Final Fantasy and mix them together. I distinctly remember my own impression at the time, which was, you're kidding, right? Now, I actually do like Disney, have for some time, pardon me, and I like Final Fantasy, especially at the time. So, It's not like I was like, oh, hey, you're just going to ruin one or the other. It was just the mixture seemed like such an oddity to me that I could not figure out how or why it would ever possibly work. And I basically refused to pick it up for quite a while. I didn't actually... I know I've told this story, forgive me. But I didn't actually pick up Kingdom Hearts 1 until my girlfriend of the time had been playing it and enjoying it, and she got stuck on Ursula, the second time you fight Ursula. And she was like, can you please help me fight this boss? I know you're good at video games. I'm like, fine. And so I fought Ursula and was blown away by how much fun it was. Just that one fight, you know. Just that one big combat boss with Ursula, and I'm just like, huh. That was awesome. Interesting. And so I asked her if I could borrow the game when she was done with it, and she said to go ahead and let me borrow it now because she wouldn't be done with it for forever. And I was like, okay. So I borrowed it and played it over the course of the weekend, beat it over the course of a weekend, which should tell you something about how much I was playing the hell out of it. And you get where I'm going with this, right? Very much, it's something you'll see in fiction in general, semi-often, actually. Sometimes people will take risks, and they will fail miserably, and people will just be like, wow, I can't believe you ever thought that would succeed. But other times people will take risks like that, and it will succeed so wildly that everyone's just like, wow. Actually, if you'll forgive me for segueing for just a second, a good example of this is the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. Again, you look at that on paper and you think, you want to make a movie about that ride? That stupid, boring ride that nobody even remembers and half the people who go to Disneyland don't even do anymore? Why? And yet they did the movie and it was great. Whether you like the quadrilogy or not, most everyone I know admits the first movie was fantastic, and it sold like crazy. And you look at it, and it's like, how was that successful? And that's kind of how I feel about Kingdom Hearts. I look at it, even now, to this day, I look at it and say, how is this successful? Now, I'm going to be doing this overall rumination in a slightly different style. I don't have much else to say about the construction of the game, other than the uncertainty thing. I'll get to that later when we get to the story. But I'm going to be talking about the controls, UE gameplay first. That's kind of normal. And then I'm going to talk about each world individually, in order, well, in relative order. And then I'm going to add a couple of things at the end, okay? So slightly different. This is to help me concentrate, because I'm already having issues, to be honest with you. Let's go ahead and talk about... Okay, now those of you who are not sold on this game, I apologize, because the next, like, 8 things I'm going to say are going to sound like how horrible this game is. I'll explain that in more detail later, why that is, and why all these are negatives, and explain the reality of it, but just bear with me, okay? First thing about Kingdom Hearts 1. The camera control is terrible. There is camera control at all. It's just bad. Basically, you have a degree of the ability to move it back and forth. It's slow, and it's cumbersome, and it contributes to a problem Kingdom Hearts 1 has in general, which is basically the flow of the game is really chunky. It doesn't actually have good flow, actually, as far as combat. I'll just put it in that way. It does not have good pacing. It does not, whatever you want to call it. It is not smooth. It's more like... Okay. When it's good, it's great. Well, okay, when it's good, it's good, actually. But then when it's bad, it's terrible, and it's just holy crap. So the camera is a big contributor to that. The whole camera general lack of control is terrible, and not just the lack of control, but the camera itself was kind of terrible. There are many bosses in Kingdom Hearts 1 that are big, or that move quickly across a huge arena, or something like that, right? And it gets really annoying when your biggest obstacle to figuring out where the boss is, or where the boss's weak point is, or whatever, is the camera. You understand where I'm going with this? Now, it's not actually a horrible camera, because I've seen that too in other games that we will not talk about here. But it is really an obstacle to going back and replaying Kingdom Hearts 1. Next thing. Well, there was this game that came out, forgive me for taking a trip down memory lane here for a moment, called Final Fantasy Adventure. Actually, it was called Seiken Densetsu 1, but whatever. Most people in the States have got it as Final Fantasy Adventure. And it was basically an attempt to do a Final Fantasy style game, an RPG, except with what is effectively best described as Zelda-style combat. Zelda top-down, specifically, style combat, of course, because the 3D games hadn't come out yet. And it worked out rather well, all things considered. It worked out so well they came out with another game called Secret of Mana, which is much more well-known. Secret of Mana took the Zelda style of combat and took it another step further. I've talked about this before, so you'll forgive me for pausing for words here, but the general idea here is it's not just Zelda combat. They went out of their way to make sure that every weapon you have equipped has its own attacks, and of course the charge attacks, and its own hitboxes and its own movement rate, and they did everything on the pixel level rather than the block level. Now, that basically makes the combat full-on top-down action, for all intents and purposes, at that point. It's its own little brand of combat. It's actually kind of hard to explain why it's different than so many other combat systems, but just bear with me, okay? The Secret of Mana combat system worked really well, and they liked that a lot. And then they put it into Seiken Densetsu 3 as well, and then that game never came out ever outside of Japan ever because Square Enix hates us, but moving on. The original thing they were going with was, in Kingdom Hearts, was really different. And they had a whole... how do I put this? One of the big pushes that they did when they were doing the Kingdom Hearts 1 thing was they wanted it to be a different feel than a Final Fantasy game. And so they didn't want turn-based combat, even action turn-based combat, which is best described by FF12, I think. That you still have the turns and you're still acting, but it's also moving full tilt, full active time, and everything's moving around and stuff like that. They wanted the full-on action thing, and their team had already developed this for, the Secret of Mana series, for the Seiken Densetsu series. So they decided to go ahead and take that and try and use that. As they were working with it, they were like, well, how do we do this in 3 dimensions? Because that was the big trick. This had to be a 3D game. Now, you can tell they were still kind of getting used to how it works, but I think this was a phenomenal idea, because number one, the Secret of Mana style of combat is great, especially when it's done right. Secret of Mana itself is a great example of that. But number two, as is obvious by further games in the series, as they keep polishing the combat engine and keep polishing the animations and the graphics and the movement, it works really well, and it provides an excellent form of what is effectively an action RPG for all intents and purposes. So that was the next big step as far as... Now, this, of course, this sounds like a positive, but I do have to mention that with Kingdom Hearts 1, it's got what I've started calling the Mario 64 syndrome. In other words, this was their first time doing this, and they were still trying to figure out how to do it. They were still trying to figure out how to get the system to work. There's this whole problem with what I like to call stalled actions. The code for Kingdom Hearts 1 basically did not support cancellation or alteration or simultaneous action. So if you do a swing and you miss, then you're going to have to wait for that swing to finish its full animation, which is only going to be about a few, tenths of a second, right? But when you're in the middle of a hectic, fully action fight, like the Kingdom Hearts series has constantly, those few tenths of a second, that half of a second or whatever, is actually a big deal. And when it's happening constantly, always, every single fight, you get where I'm going with this. It does get a little bit old. Going back from, say, Kingdom Hearts 2, where they had the combat engine almost beautifully fluid, to Kingdom Hearts 1, where it's this clunky and it has this many problems, is just, the difference is monumental, at least to someone like me. I know other people have said this as well, so I'm not trying to be an elitist bastard here, I'm just mentioning it. And on top of that, we also have the jumping mechanic, because again, this is in full 3D. And one of the things they were big on was they wanted to have, I hate to call them jumping puzzles, because these really aren't jumping puzzles, but they wanted you to have, I don't know what else to call them, really, really mild jumping puzzles. They wanted you to actually be maneuvering around in, full 3D, up, down, in addition to the 8 cardinal directions. And so there's a lot of things where you have to jump up on crates, or jump up over this thing, or jump up onto this log, or stuff like that, right? The problem is the jumping and the physics for maneuvering both weren't really working yet, and if you'll just watch the game for a minute, and hell, you don't even have to play long into the game. You could play the game for like 20 minutes, and you will know exactly what I'm talking about. The jump works weird. Once you finish your apex, you actually hover for about a second as the physics tries to take over and then pulls you down, but it pulls you down in a very strange manner, and the game is really picky about what you can land on and what you can't. So if you missed, just by a pixel where you were supposed to land on, you'll just slide off of the ledge of what looks like a perfectly landable spot, and blah, 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 blah. It's just again, this is just one of those things that's a little thing, but it's so consistent throughout the whole game, up until you learn how to fly, of course, that it's just immensely irritating, and it makes the game much more frustrating to play than it really needs to be. And it makes the whole overall combat, maneuvering, jumping puzzle, etc. thing feel much more frustrating than it really needed to. But, to be fair, I will again mention that this was their first time doing this, and they did get better about this. Kingdom Hearts 2 alone sells that, but be it Birth by Sleep, which is my personal favorite as far as the combat systems of the Kingdom Hearts, really showed that they learned their lesson and they figured it out and they know what they're doing now. So, woo! I have another note here about the boss fights. I just want to mention this again. I know I already mentioned this in brief, but I just got to add, Kingdom Hearts has a lot of really epic, awesome boss fights, or rather, I should rephrase this, boss fights that should have been more epic than they were. It's not like they failed. It's not like the boss fights were bad. But so many of the boss fights felt subpar compared to what they should have been, or less than what they could have been, not filling up to their potential because of all the problems I've mentioned, because of the jumping, because of the combat mechanic, because of the camera, because the lock-on system. Oh god, I didn't even mention the lock-on system, sorry. The lock-on system really was screwy in Kingdom Hearts 1. You have to have a lock-on system if you're having a 3D action RPG, basically, unless you're going to give, in some manner or another, unless you're going to do the other route, which I'm not even going to talk about. You have to have some kind of a lock-on system. And in Kingdom Hearts 1's, it's finicky, it's twitchy, and it really screws with the camera when you have that lock-on. So, pardon me. So, yeah, I'll give you one very big example of this. The Cerberus Fight, the first time you fight him in Hercules' world. That should have felt like this big, awesome, yeah, fight. Instead, every time I fight that, it's just irritating. Even the first time I fought that, I was like, oh yeah, this is going to be great. I'm going to be pumped, and oh god, I can't see his head. Hang on. Okay, let me just get up on his back. Okay, no, hang on. I fell off of his... hang on. No? What the... Okay, hang on. The whole thing should have been so much more epic, and just kind of kept... It felt like it was someone who was blaring John Williams music, right? Yeah! Except every so often, one guy in the back would just kind of hit a cowbell or something. And it's just like, why are you doing that? You're ruining this music! Now, one other thing that Kingdom Hearts 1 had a big problem with the something new, the Mario 64 problem I already talked about, is what I call Claustrophobia Syndrome. Now, I do suffer from a bit of claustrophobia. I don't actually have claustrophobia, I just don't like enclosed spaces. That may not actually be claustrophobia, but you get the point, right? So this may be affecting me more than it would you or anyone else who has played Kingdom Hearts 1, if you understand what I mean by this. But probably the single best example of this is the... oh, what's the name of the place? Hang on. What's the name of the world? Wonderland! The Wonderland world. Because of the limitations of code and experience and the processing, the hardware at the time, the PS2 could do more than this, but you have to understand this was still relatively early on in the PS2's lifespan, and they hadn't figured out exactly what they were doing yet, like I said. So I'm not actually calling this a detriment per se, but it does bother me how small so many of the places feel. Like I said, claustrophobia syndrome. You go into a room, and it's just a room. It's this dinky little room. And you go into the next room, and it's just this dinky little room. I like games that, even if they aren't open, do at least look or feel open. You understand where I'm going with this? Now, that takes time. That takes code. That takes graphics designers' effort to work. And it takes processing power to be rendering all that stuff that basically isn't being used. It's background. It's fluff. But when you have the opposite... Now, and I can understand why you wouldn't want that. But when you go too far in the extreme, you're basically walking from one tiny little enclosed room to the next. And again, Wonderland is probably the best example of this, because Wonderland feels very, very small, even though it really probably shouldn't. There's a couple other places that feel like this. Deep Jungle comes to mind. Monstro comes to mind. Agrabah was probably the worst by far. However, to be fair, I will also mention that several of the areas do feel very open, even if they aren't. Neverland and Atlantica both come to mind. And of course, Hollow Bastion and the End of the World both pulled that off very well. So it is obvious that they did start to learn how to do that as the game went on. I just wanted to mention that several of the earlier worlds really had that claustrophobia syndrome, whatever you want to call that. Now, there's one final thing that I have to mention. I just have to. In Kingdom Hearts, even 1, and all of the Kingdom Hearts, even up to Triple D, the most recent one, have had this problem. It has been getting less and less each game. Thank God! And I hope this problem finally goes away entirely in Kingdom Hearts 3. And do not mistake, I understand why they did this, okay? I get it. I am a programmer. I understand the coding reasons and the logistic reasons and the money and time reasons why they did this. But it bugs the crap out of me, and it has never not. Even when I first played this game. The faces, okay? They have 2 methods of doing faces in the Kingdom Hearts series. One, they will have a static mesh, you know, just basically a blank face which has a texture on it. And the texture will animate. And it looks terrible. It looks absolutely abysmally awful. In some cases, it looks so bad, I look at that and I can't even believe that's the same character, because they have a second method, where the face is fully meshed. They actually have a nose. They actually have eyes. It's fully animated. You know, their eyes will actually move around, and their eyebrows will move, and their faces can move. You know, no real limitation on how much movement and animation the face can have. You follow where I'm going with this? Now, even in Kingdom Hearts 1, the latter, where they have full animation, looks great. And it really helps flesh out their expressions and their emotions and what they're doing in the scene. It's awesome, right? But the former looks so bad, especially not just in general, because it does look bad in general, but it looks much worse by comparison. And so when you're in the middle of a cutscene, and in one cutscene, it will flop back and forth between I'm just doing the texture thing, and then I have a fully animated face. The contrast is horrifying. In Kingdom Hearts 1, probably the worst example of that is the villain of Jungle Book, whose name I can't think of off the top of my head. Forgive me, the hunter guy. But my personal favorite example, forgive me for skipping to another game, because again, they keep doing this throughout the series, is Kingdom Hearts 2, Saïx. Saïx has a very expressive face, all things considered, and a very specific degree of emotions that go across his face and go across his expression. Except when he's got the 2D texture face, in which case it looks like he's like half asleep and bored. And he's just like, he goes from being, I am Saïx, to, and it's just, whoa. I'm glad that that's getting a less and less of a thing across the series, but it's really bad here in Kingdom Hearts 1, and I really hope they finally get rid of that in 3. Let's talk about the Gummi Ships. We're still talking about combat for the most part here. The Gummi Ships are okay, this is going to sound weird, alright? It's clunky. The UI is difficult, and very difficult to get used to. There's actually only so much you can do. You are actually quite limited in how much you can do as far as design and structure of the ships you can make. And the stages are boring to the point of sleep-inducing. Yet somehow the whole thing was still fun, and I'm glad for that, because that, as a result of the fact that people still liked the Gummi ship and the traveling through thing, we got the Gummi system in Kingdom Hearts 2, which I will probably be talking about a lot more. I also love the fact that it was just this little smidgen of Star Fox fun. Even though the stages were really boring, it was still good to have the old Star Fox thing going on in this game. And it was a nice way to have, instead of an overworld, you know, we play these Star Fox levels in order to go in between the worlds. I liked that. And it made sense in the lore, too. But one thing I do have to add, lore-related, the music and background in the Gummi sections both change and get more serious. Excuse me, Sean. Get more serious and get darker the further you get into the game. Now, that's literal in many ways in a lore perspective, because as you get further and further, you know, east along the map, as you get closer and closer to darkness, you are getting closer and closer to darkness. You are getting closer and closer to the terminus point, where you until you finally hit the end of the world. I love that. I love the way they did that. I mean, as you're going through Hollow Bastion, you know, there's just this black hole of doom that you're approaching, and when you finally go past Hollow Bastion all the way to the end of the world, you're actually in the black hole, and there's basically nothing you can see in any direction at all. The music is very serious and very, you know, dum 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 dum, and I really like how they did that. Again, it's one of those background things I was just talking about. It's there for flavor, but it really does help elevate the fact that, you know, early on you're just like, ah. But as you get closer and closer to darkness, you are literally descending into the darkness. I like that. So just wanted to mention that. Now, all of this sounds like a lot of complaining, like I said earlier. But even ignoring everything I'm going to say after this point, you know, all the story reasons why I love this game, in my opinion, was still worth playing. And you're going to look at me and be like, what? That's crazy. All you've been doing is complaining about how disinteresting the game is to play. Well, follow with me, okay? First of all, it was our first really good 3D action RPG. I know, there was ones before this, but in my opinion, this is the first one that really hit a sweet spot and did really well. It's one of the reasons I think, personally, that it managed to sell as well as it did. And it was a fun action RPG. Fun action RPG. It had heavily stylized graphics. This is important. I've talked about this before. When you specifically stylize your graphics, the odds of them being good later, the odds of them aging better, are much higher because of the obvious reasons. Because stylized graphics will age better than trying to look realistic and, you know, failing at it because graphics aren't there yet. You know, look at the difference between, you know, Link to the Past, for example, or Mario 64. Which one of those has aged better, despite the fact that one of them's older? You know what I mean? This is, of course, opinion, as all such things are, but my point is, these stylized graphics suited it extremely well, because even the Final Fantasy characters didn't actually look out of place alongside the new characters, the Kingdom Hearts characters, you know, Sora, Riku, etc., and alongside the Disney characters. It all blends quite well. It's this nice in-between graphic style of, well, it's kind of hard to explain, but it is basically pseudo-cartoony, pseudo-cel-shaded. It wasn't actually cel-shaded. Kind of a shame. I think cel-shading would have worked great for the Kingdom Hearts series, but whatever. Pseudo-realistic, because, you know, the Final Fantasy characters do have proper proportions and whatnot, and everyone looked appropriate relative to each other, and so it all blends surprisingly well from a graphics perspective. Sora, just to use him as the example, doesn't look any more out of place on Tarzan's world than he does on Hollow Bastion, and Squall doesn't look any more out of place next to you know, Goofy than he does next to Cloud, for example. I know they don't actually stand side by side in this game, but you know where I'm going with this. So it worked very well. Now, there was also one other thing that Kingdom Hearts has in extensiveness. I'm pretty sure I mentioned this in my last video. Forgive me, I didn't bother watching it before uploading it, because it was a long video, and frankly, I didn't feel like it. And I did it like 6 months ago, actually, now. Actually, I think we're into the 7-month range. Whatever. Point being, Kingdom Hearts has always had a very much cool factor. Now, cool factor is much harder to explain than any of the other things I've tried to explain that can make a game enjoyable. Generally, cool factor doesn't necessarily mean being powerful or overpowered. The badass factor, if you prefer. Cool factor is just, oh, that's cool, or oh, that looks cool. It doesn't necessarily have to be the player. It could be the terrain, it could be the enemies, it could be the NPCs, you know, something. But Kingdom Hearts 1 did have very much a cool factor, and forgive me, but I don't know how to explain it much better than that. But the stuff you could pull off, especially if you're good at the game, and once you start figuring out how to work with the camera and the UE and the jump system and all that fun stuff, you could pull off all sorts of crazy stuff, and it looks awesome, you know, and you're fighting awesome-looking giant Doom enemies of awesome, and it just had this general cool factor. I'm sorry for just simplifying it so succinctly, but it's one of the things that not only was really enjoyed, but it was latched onto by the fans, and the developers recognized this because every Kingdom Hearts since then has also been placed emphasis upon the cool factor elements. Kingdom Hearts 2 is a great example of that. They really pushed the cool factor element in Kingdom Hearts 2. Kind of too far, actually, if you'll forgive me for saying so, but I'll talk about that later. One last fact I'd like to throw out here. We're officially hitting the part now where we're going to start talking about spoilers for anybody who cares. I just thought I'd mention that. There was a huge uncertainty as to whether or not Kingdom Hearts would sell. As I mentioned, it was a risk. That probably sounds like me saying "duh" to you, but it was. It was a huge risk, and nobody was certain if it would actually sell or not. In fact, fun fact, if you'll forgive me for throwing out another fact at you here. I suddenly can't think of Sakaguchi, I believe is his name. Forgive me if I'm getting the wrong name. Was involved in the development of Kingdom Hearts. In fact, Kingdom Hearts was basically the last game he had any involvement with within Square. And they had started working on this, and well, okay, let me take a step back. They wanted to do a game which was essentially Nintendo and Final Fantasy mixed together. You know, Zelda and Mario and Metroid and all that. That's actually funny that I mentioned that, by the way, because before I knew this fact, one of my favorite alternate Kingdom Hearts type games was exactly that. Imagine if we had been going to the Mario worlds and the Metroid worlds and all that instead of the Disney ones. And everyone I pitched that idea to's reaction was awesome. That would have been so cool. But anyways, that was apparently kind of where they were going with initially, and we'll probably never know, or at least I will never know why it never actually happened. I did try to do some research, and basically it never came to anything. But what I do know is that the alternate idea was pitched of, well, why don't we do that kind of a 3D world thing, Secret of Mana thing with Disney. Now, at the time, the offices of the Disney people who worked in Japan and Square happened to be in the same building. And there was a happenstance meeting between, the two people, and the gentleman, I believe it was Sakaguchi, again, forgive me if I'm getting the wrong name, said, happened to be there in the elevator with the Disney executive, and he happened to be like, well, hey, and he pitched the idea, and that's kind of how that got it started. But the other interesting thing I find about this is, as they were working on it, it was very much a kids game. I've heard some people say Kingdom Hearts, the series, is a kid's game. Those people are idiots. I'm sorry. I usually don't like to draw the line there. But really, ignoring how horrifying the story is, ignoring the fact that it is a tragedy, ignoring the seriousness of how it's presented, I could see people arguing that Kingdom Hearts could be a kid's game. But when I say originally it was a kid's game, I mean originally it was a kid's game. Okay, I don't even know how to further emphasize this. I can't even think of another game off the top of my head that really gets the point across. It was designed for 14 and under, And Sakaguchi, the Final Fantasy... No, Hironobu, right? I'm going to look this up. I'm sorry. I have so much respect for the man. I really want to look this up. Is that his name? Hironobu Sakaguchi? Yes, okay, I am getting the right guy. Hironobu Sakaguchi said, if we don't make this game with the same level of quality and seriousness of storytelling and character development as we do the Final Fantasy series, and do keep in mind at the time, the CFF series was up to 9 and they were still... Anyways, if we don't put that level of effort and seriousness, if we don't treat it with that level of seriousness, this series will not sell. And fortunately, people listen to him, because I actually agree completely. The Kingdom Hearts series might have kept going if they had made it a kiddie game, if they had made it a, pre-teenager game like they were originally going to do. But I guarantee you it wouldn't have sold nearly as well, and those of us who are not of that age group would never have been able to enjoy the awesome story and gameplay and all that fun stuff that the Kingdom Hearts series has brought us. So, awesome. But there is one other big thing about this that I wanted to mention. That was just point 1. Point 2 here is they didn't know if Kingdom Hearts would do anything, and so when the main guys sat down, Nomura himself being one of the main writers, who would eventually become the writer for the entire series, and by eventually I mean immediately after Kingdom Hearts 1, sat down and wrote the story of Kingdom Hearts 1. While there is certainly foreshadowing, it was basically okay. I've talked before about how, when I write, I tend to write skeleton. That is to say, I write a framework, and then I fill in the blanks, right? That's basically what he had done. He had the vaguest ideas of what was going on with the overall setting, but it was all just vague stuff that he hadn't really fleshed out yet. And the reason I bring this up is because if you actually analyze the story of all the Kingdom Hearts, the only one that doesn't fit is Kingdom Hearts 1. Well, I mean, it does fit, but it doesn't really gel with the other ones nearly as well. And the reason why is what I just came into, because Kingdom Hearts 1 was written with the idea that it might fail. It was written with the idea that this is just its one game. Now, they left in a hole for a sequel. Of course they did, because they wanted to keep doing this as a series. But the whole story, from Birth by Sleep up to 3D, hadn't been written yet, if you understand where I'm going with this. Just this one section of it with some vague ideas about, the overall setting had been written. That's one of the reasons why Kingdom Hearts 1 mentions things and does things that doesn't quite fit with everything else, but while this may sound like a negative overall, I do have to mention two very positive things. One, in the secret ending, they mentioned a whole bunch of different lines that are flung out. Those lines weren't actually designed to be anything. Those were just random lines. They were basically written into the game later, Kingdom Hearts 2 specifically later, to make it fit, which was awesome, because they actually managed to pull that off without planning, if you understand what I mean. But two, I definitely have to give the writers and Nomura a great deal of credit, because they succeeded at taking what was effectively one story and then fleshing it out both in both directions, both past and future, and still they did actually make it work. I mean, like I said, it doesn't quite gel as well as everything else does, but they did actually take a game that was effectively written to possibly fail and then say, okay, now let's write the whole mythos. Or mythos, if you prefer. And I mention that specifically because after Kingdom Hearts 1 succeeded, I'll mention this again in 358, or not 358, Recom. But, once they finished Kingdom Hearts 1, once Kingdom Hearts 1 was really successful, they sat down and wrote everything else that we've seen about the Kingdom Hearts series. Now, there is some contention as to whether or not Kingdom Hearts 3 was already written at this point in time. We know it's written now. We know that the story for 3 is written as of now. But we're not 100% sure if it was written back when he sat down and wrote Birth by Sleep and Com, and then 358, and then 2, and then Recoded, and then Triple D. I just thought I'd mention that because it's interesting to me. Now, okay. The idea of doing cameos alongside... Well, okay, the way they did cameos... I don't know why I started with this, but whatever, I'm just following my notes here. The way they did cameos was actually a good idea, because the cameos weren't just, hi, I'm, Tarzan, hi, I'm Alice from Wonderland, In many cases, the cameos would actually join the party for periods of time. And that was good. That was actually really cool. Now, some people would not do that, myself included, in more recent play games. But that's because, I've kind of leveled Donald and Goofy and spec'd them out, not this random person who just wanted to. But it was a good idea. It was a good idea to actually have Disney characters, and in some cases, Final Fantasy characters join the party, even if only for a brief period of time, so that it just kind of helped flesh it out a little bit, if you understand where I'm going with that. I thought that was a good addition, most especially in Hollow Bastion, which I'll talk about later, of course. I also like the fact that they made a point of having the... I'm trying to think how to put this properly. As I mentioned... Well, okay, no, I guess I haven't mentioned this yet. In Kingdom Hearts, there's effectively 3 types of characters, okay? For all intents and purposes. We have the... I can't think of their damn names. We have the original characters, what I like to call the Kingdom Hearts characters. Then, immediately following the Kingdom Hearts characters, the Final Fantasy characters, and then after those, we have the Disney characters, right? The primary story is, without question or hesitation, about the Kingdom Hearts characters, and that's true across the entire series, by the way. It is all about the Kingdom Hearts characters, the good guys, the bad guys, the in-betweens, all that stuff. But they had excellent usage of both Disney and Final Fantasy characters to not just make them be there, be like, hey, look, it's your favorite character from Final Fantasy VII or whatever. But instead, these characters have something to do with the story. They have something to do with the plot. Now, this is not always true, but for the especially in Kingdom Hearts 1. But for the most part, every time you'd see someone from one of the Final Fantasies or from one of the Disney games, they at least have something to do with the story or the themes or the character development of the characters. You know, something. They have some purpose, right? Again, Kingdom Hearts 1 kind of fails on that at some points, but that was an excellent idea. It's using the tools they had, basically. In other words, it is using the potential that was there properly, and so I just wanted to give them props for actually having, you know, Sid be someone who is actually relevant to the story, or, you know, Sid from FF7, and having Squall from FF8, of all characters, being relevant to the story, you know, stuff like that, right? Very good job on that. I just want to take an aside really quick and mention that I like Squall in the Kingdom Hearts series a billion times more than I've ever liked him in FF8. Anyways, moving on. Now, one other thing about Kingdom Hearts 1. Kingdom Hearts 1 has a weird problem with a lot of its cutscenes, and I'm going to call it misuse of music, because I think that's the primary problem. In many cases, there were cutscenes that basically had an awkward quality to them, and really felt like they shouldn't have. You know what I mean? They should have been evoking emotion A, B, or C, and the music and the sound and the style, or the lack of music, that's another thing they did often. They would just have no music. And it would sap so much of the point, purpose, impact, whatever, of any given scene. And it happens a lot in Kingdom Hearts 1. It does happen throughout the Kingdom Hearts series in general. It's something they've never quite gotten over. And as much as I defend this series and love this series, every time I see any one of these scenes, and it's always obvious, because each time there's just this awkward feel to it, it's just like, eh. But that also relates to my next point. Kingdom Hearts 1, specifically, feels like it was written to be smaller. It was written to be a shorter game. To simplify what I'm about to say excessively, there's the intro, there's the prologue, and then there's the first section, and then there's what feels like a decent chunk of filler in between. And then there's some stuff that actually has to do with the progression of the plot in the later Disney worlds. And then there's Hollow Bastion, and then the story begins. You know where I'm going with this? Anybody who's played this game understands what I mean by this. I actually told a friend of mine who was playing this series for the first time, is this plot ever going to go anywhere? And I was like, alright, just get to Hollow Bastion and you'll get. He's like, okay. I've often heard it said that Kingdom Hearts 1 starts at Hollow Bastion. And there's many reasons for that. I'll get to that later. But my point here is that it feels like they had decided, they had written, they had constructed Kingdom Hearts 1, and they were like, hang on. We need to stretch this out more. And so they shoved more Disney worlds into certain points at it. And while they did a decent job with it, all things considered, they do feel kind of disjointed from the rest of the game, especially since in many cases they don't contribute anything to either character development, setting, the plot, or, well, I guess that's it. So they're just kind of there for their own sake. Kind of an interesting little thing. I'll talk about that more in a point-by-point thing, but let's talk about Travers Town first. Travers Town is extremely well constructed. I mentioned earlier the Claustrophobia Syndrome. Travers Town very much succeeds at not feeling claustrophobic, even though it is actually a fairly small area. And it certainly feels much larger than it should be, and that's a good thing, because Travers Town not only has many thematic relevances to it, but it's supposed to feel important thematically. It's supposed to feel, literally, to both the player and, of course, to Sora, the main character, like you're taking your first step into a larger world. Literally, because this is the first time he's left his island. A lot of people tend to skip over that when going to the game because it's not actually emphasized as well as it probably should have been. But do keep in mind, this is literally Sora's first step into another world. There should be some impact to that, and I do like the design and the thematic layout of Travers Town does help emphasize that, even if the cutscenes and the otherwise don't do it as well as they probably should. I would also add that this is one of everything I just talked about is something that Kingdom Hearts does beautifully in two separate manners. Symbolism. Nomura really, really likes symbolism. I'm not going to cover all the points of symbolism throughout the entire series, because that would get old. It's everywhere. But he likes to do two types of symbolism. Really, really, really obvious, and really, 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 really subtle. And most of the times, the subtle stuff is only... in fact, in virtually every case, the subtle stuff is only really noticeable on repeat playthroughs, or through deep analysis, which generally involves a repeat playthrough, so whatever. So overall positives about Travers Town. I also like the fact that the initial team we encounter is basically Squall, Eris, and Yuffie. I'd also like to take an aside and say that good job to Square. It's too easy, especially... Well, okay, from what I understand, Disney gets a lot of the props for this, but the voice acting for the characters in Kingdom Hearts is actually pretty good, all things considered. It's not great. It's not, you know, StarCraft 2 level awesome, but it is very well done, and they did pick some very good voice actors and some very high-budget voice actors in several cases. And from what I understand, most of that is because not only did Disney insist, but Disney paid for it, because voice acting is expensive, and, you know, this was a game they weren't even sure was going to succeed or not. So, yay! Awesome for that. But I mention this because Kingdom Hearts is the first time we hear a voice for many characters. Eris, Yuffie, Squall, Sid, Cloud. All of these characters are the very first time we ever hear them voice acted is in Kingdom Hearts 1. The voice actor for Cloud, I can't think of his name, I'm sorry, forgive me, is the same voice actor that's been doing his voice in English, at least. I'm sorry, I'm speaking of English, of course, because I don't know the Japanese voice actors or whatever. But the same English voice actor has been voicing Cloud ever since he did it here in Kingdom Hearts 1. And the same for Yuffie, and the same for Squall. They did switch the Eris voice actress, which is a shame, because I liked this voice actress, the one they had here, better than the later one. But from what I understand, she wasn't interested in the role, and she was a little too pricey anyways, but whatever. Point is, good job on all that, and they managed to get most of either the original voice actors for the Disney characters, or someone who could do a really good impression of it. And so Donald sounds like Donald. Goofy sounds like Goofy, you know. And that's another thing we are introduced to right off the bat here, is that these people do sound like they should. Very well done, and very excellent job on that. Probably my favorite example of doing a voice properly, and noticeably properly, is actually Sebastian over in Atlantica. But I just wanted to mention that here because, again, first impressions are important, and it's really good that right here, right off the bat, we are introduced to, you know, so many things. Now, I skipped over something. Forgive me. Let me rewind just a little bit. Actually, you know what? No, I've already kind of screwed up the order, so I'm going to talk about that later. So forgive me. Let's move on to Wonderland. I have only a couple of notes about Wonderland. I already mentioned the claustrophobia thing. But there is one thing I have to mention. Again, good voice acting. The woman who did the Queen of Hearts, and the woman who does Alice, the girl, whatever, who does Alice. Both very well done, and got across the point very well. The fun thing about Wonderland is, even though it's... Well, okay, Wonderland is one of the worlds I don't think was filler. As weird as that sounds. And there's two really big reasons for this. One, this is the very first time we were introduced to the concept of the Princesses of Heart. We have no idea what that means. In fact, we don't even hear that term here. But this is the first time that that is actually referenced and actually brought up into the story, which is not only a major plot point of this game, but actually becomes a major plot point of the series as a whole that is still relevant even when Kingdom Hearts 3 comes out. So, awesome. Very well done on that. The second point is the Cheshire Cat, which was absolute brilliance, whoever decided to do this. You see, the Cheshire Cat is what I like to call an exposition bonanza. He actually gives away a lot of information, but he does it in his own particular style, because he's the Cheshire Cat. He never comes out and says A is B. He'll say it in this really roundabout, sing-song, you're not 100% sure what he's saying kind of way. I think that was brilliant to have so much information, you know, given away, basically right off the bat here in the first Disney World we visit. Or, well, it can be the first one. You have some option and choices. But anyways, right off the bat, through someone who is speaking in riddles and in metaphors, so that again, you know, the first time through, it's just like, okay, and you may or may not figure it out. It doesn't matter, because the point is, you at least get the idea, and the second time through, you understand fully what he's saying, because you already know all the stuff he's telling you, right? Very good, Dud. Now, I have much less good... I have far few good things to say about the Deep Jungle. That's the Tarzan world. First of all, the level design and layout are terrible. Okay? I'm just going to lay this out flat. They are bad. And very poorly guided is the word I want to use. And it's effectively a pseudo-maze. And I say pseudo because it's not actually a maze. It's just poorly designed. I know at least 4 people off the top of my head, including myself, I freely debase myself here, who got lost our first time through Deep Jungle badly. In some cases over the hour or 2-hour mark, just because of how badly designed that place was. And I don't mean lost like in one spot. I mean, you know, okay, we figured out where this next cutscene is, where we have to be. Okay. Hang on. No, not this way. Hang on, let me go back. No, not this way. And it was just... Ah, God! One other important thing, though, about the Deep Jungle. With the possible exception of one scene, the Deep Jungle serves no purpose. It is pure filler. It is there because it's a Disney World, and like I said earlier, they were trying to pad out the middle of the game. We don't learn anything more about the plot. We don't learn anything more about the Heartless. We don't learn anything more about... I haven't even talked about the Heartless yet, have I? We don't learn anything more about, you know, the overall setting or the story or no. The only thing that could be considered to be relevant at all, in my opinion, about the Deep Jungle, is the scene in which Sora and Donald are actually happy to see each other. Now, I'll mention that later, but frankly, the story still could have gone on without that scene. So honestly, you could literally just take the Deep Jungle and remove it from the game, and I don't think the game would suffer in any way for it. Now let's move on to Hercules. Hercules' level, which I don't even remember what it's called. I don't care. It's the Colosseum. Unlike the Deep Jungle, the Colosseum was not only awesome, but very relevant to the story. Well, okay, somewhat relevant to the overall story, because... Well, let's talk about the awesome factor. First of all, James Woods. James Woods has gone on record saying anytime they bring Hades back in a Kingdom Hearts game, he would gladly voice it. That is one of the reasons why Hades has been in so many of the Kingdom Hearts games, voice acted, is because of that, because he just kept being like, yeah, I'll do the part again, it's awesome. In case anyone was wondering about that. But, in addition to James Woods' awesomeness, the cutscenes in Hercules area are generally very well done, even though... It's always, I admit it has always weirded me out horribly that the Colosseum where you're actually fighting in is totally and utterly devoid of people, even though you hear crowds. I know, this is a weird and stupid complaint, but it's always just niggled in the back of my mind. It's always bothered me just a little bit, you know. Yeah, we're the champs! And you hear the applause, and you're just in this completely empty stadium. And it gets this kind of creepy vibe about it. But anyways, we're just going to move on from that. My point is that the stuff there is fun. The Danny DeVito guy, I believe it's not actually Danny DeVito, it's someone else, does a good job of the satyr. I can't even think of his damn name. You know, everyone does a good job of the voice acting. The characters are likable, and some of the scenes are genuinely funny. But it's, like I said, it's also relevant to the story for 2 big reasons. One, it's the introduction of Cloud. This is not me being an FF7 fanboy. I mention this because Cloud is actually an excellent example, even in FF7, of the dichotomy of light and darkness. And using him as a way to exemplify that within Kingdom Hearts was a good idea, in my opinion, whether he was popular or not. And 2, related to that, Cloud and Sora have a discussion about searching for their light. Now, this discussion is actually very relevant because it brings up a point that will be very crucial to many of the character developments and many of the story progression throughout the entire series, and that is that different people view the light in different ways. I mean, obviously, you know, they're all searching for the light, but when one person says the light, they don't mean the same person. They are not referring to the same specific thing as another person, and different people have different sources of light. I'm searching for my light. In fact, I believe that's almost exactly what Sora says. I'm searching for my light too, as he's talking to Cloud. This is the first time this is ever brought up, and this will be brought up again and again throughout the course of the series, so that was very relevant, and very well done, all things considered. This is also the first hint of the triad. I'll talk about the triad later, but I just wanted to mention that this is the first time that the whole triad thing becomes obvious from a thematic perspective and not just the three kids perspective. Again, I'll get to that later. Let's move on to Agrabah. I'm sorry. Agrabah is probably the worst example in Kingdom Hearts 1 of a problem that I've kept silent about so far. But the Kingdom Hearts series in general does it, and I will mention it again in Kingdom Hearts 2, because there's a couple worlds where it's even worse in Kingdom Hearts 2, believe it or not. Rehashing the movie syndrome, okay? Now, sometimes when they rehash the movie, they will do... Okay, well, let me explain what that means. When you visit Disney World A, Agrabah in this case, they assume that the events of the movie, Aladdin, haven't happened yet. And so they kind of go through the motions of the movie during the course of you going through the world in the game, right? Now, I think that's a bad idea in general, to be a little bit blunt with you. But I will admit that if it does and has been done properly, and it will be done properly throughout the series in several cases, where if you're rehashing the movie, you do it while weaving the elements of the game and the elements of the story and the themes and the relevance thereof into the movie, then that can actually work. But in some cases, they basically just rehash the plot of the movie and you're along for the ride. And Agrabah is probably the worst example in Kingdom Hearts 1 of this. So as much as I love the music of Agrabah, and I do, and as much as I love the visual design of Agrabah, and I do, despite the Claustrophobia Syndrome really badly in the city, every time I get to Agrabah, I just kind of groan a little bit, because it's just like, alright, let's go ahead and do the thing again. And it also feels like they were trying a little bit too hard with the genie. No offense to Dan Castellaneta, or however the hell you pronounce his name, because he's a great voice actor. But it felt like they were really pushing too hard to make the genie wacky. And it just kind of falls flat on its face. So I really... Now I will say one thing that is positive about Agrabah, and that is the Cave of Wonders, which is how you do a maze properly. Its layout, by contrast, was not confusing at all. It made perfect sense. Everything flowed properly. When you fall into a pit, you fall into an area that's immediately below you, and it's got its own little, structure. And it was basically a two-story dungeon, for all intents and purposes. And that worked really well, all things considered. So, definite props there for the level designers doing that more better. I will also mention that this is our second mention of the Princesses of Heart, Jasmine in this case, and it is mentioned, at least in passing, that there is a relevance to that other than we're just rehashing the movie. But overall, I just kind of don't like this world in Kingdom Hearts 1. Now, I want to talk about Halloweentown next, but I'm not going to, because I'm going to talk about Monstro next, because I hate Monstro. I don't know anybody who's ever played this game personally, which is only like 6 people, admittedly, who likes the Monstro. It's kind of funny, though, because Monstro, as far as a lore and story perspective, is, again, one of those critical points in the story. So why do we hate Monstro? Well, first of all, it's frickin' Monstro. It's a damn giant whale in space. Who's just flowing through space, by the way. Just whatever, okay, Disney, yeah, sure, fine, but what the hell? Second of all, the design of the interior is not... Obviously, they couldn't make it gross and be like an actual inside of a whale, but what it is more like a acid trip or something, I mean, I don't know what acid trip looks like, but, it just looks like you're on drugs of some sort. The whole place has this weird, unpleasant design to it, and it has one of the worst layouts of all the worlds. Not as bad as Jungle. Nothing as bad as the Jungle. But the overall design of this attempt at a maze is terrible. And, is all I can really say to that. Every time I get to Monstro, it's just like, alright, let's get through the maze so I can see the awesome. Now, I mentioned the awesome. Like I said, this is a very critical story point for 2 very big reasons. I haven't talked about Riku much yet. And I won't until we get to the end of this thing. But I'm going to mention Riku briefly here. This is a big character moment for Riku. It's the first time he's actually joined up with Sora since the beginning of the game. Actually, theoretically, it's the first time he's joined up with Sora, period. And it also is Riku demonstrating the fact that he's getting a little bit too much of tunnel vision, and the fact that he is descending is the word I want to use. I'll go into that more later. But there's one other very important thing that is mentioned here. And I'm going to summarize it with 4 simple words, okay? Pinocchio has a heart. Now, that may not sound relevant to you or me, but this is the first time it is established throughout the entire series, actually, that individuals that are not people can still have hearts. This is something that will be covered in the future as well throughout the series. I mean, obviously the worlds have hearts, we know that. And we know that people, living sentient beings, have hearts. But this is the first time it is firmly established that a puppet, a walking doll, something that is not a person by most standards of the definition, still has a heart. And that is very relevant for defining what heart actually means throughout the Kingdom Hearts series, and emphasizing the importance thereof, again, throughout the series. So I just thought I'd mention that there. Now let's rewind a bit and go back to Halloweentown. Halloweentown is semi-important for story and plot reasons, but even if it wasn't, Halloweentown is one of the worlds that most people enjoy. Even PAX enjoyed Halloweentown. Because A, most people who don't even like Disney tend to still enjoy The Nightmare Before Christmas. And B, because it's fun. The layout of most of the areas, with one exception, is really well done. The fights are fun. The pseudo-boss fights and the boss fights are fun. The dialogue is good. The voice acting is at least passable. All things considered, Halloweentown is just fun. It's a very well constructed, very well done world in and of itself. So even if it had nothing to do with the plot, like Deep Jungle did, it would still be fun to go through. Now, Halloweentown is one of those examples of a degree of subtlety with regards to the symbolism I mentioned earlier and the relevance to the plot. Like I said, in Agrabah, or not Agrabah, I'm sorry, in Monstro it was pretty obvious and right in your face. In Halloweentown, we learned 2 really important things. Well, okay. We learn one really important thing, and it means 2 things. 1, even those who are not evil, even those who do not have dark intent, can be lured to the darkness. The idea of controlling the Heartless is what they show in Halloweentown. And that's from someone who is basically speaking from innocence, from relative lack of knowledge and information. That's actually going to be really important throughout the course of the entire series, but it also emphasizes a point that is very important. Well, but I'm sorry, I'm doing this in the wrong order. It shows the insidiousness of the Heartless, first of all. How easy it is for them to work their way into a world. How incredibly easy it is for a Heartless to actually to infiltrate, to spread, to grow. I mean, they're one of the most insidious, mindless hordes I've seen in fiction when it comes down to it, because it is so very easy for them to get just about anywhere. There's darkness in every heart, if you'll remember the quote, which is actually not true, but whatever. But the second point, and the point I started saying first, is this is basically the very first step to something that's going to be a hugely important point to the entire Kingdom Hearts series, which can be summarized very simply. Darkness is not evil. That is going to become very relevant throughout the course of the series, and it is advanced right here in the very first game. Right here at Halloweentown is the first time we see that. The idea that darkness by itself is not evil. I'll talk about that more later. I apologize for I keep saying that. Hey, I got a couple more worlds to go through. Oh god, I'm starting to hurt, but it's okay. I can do this. I can do this. Bravery strats. Okay. Atlantica. Atlantica I actually enjoy a lot. I know I'm one of the only people who really likes Atlantica in the first Kingdom Hearts, but I really, really enjoy the 3-dimensional movement. I think it worked great. I think it was a lot of fun. I think Ursula was beautifully done, both from a story and voice acting perspective, and from the perspective of fighting her. I think her boss fights were both very enjoyable, especially the second one. I mentioned that. That was the first time I ever played Kingdom Hearts, was fighting Ursula the second time. I thought it was awesome. I still enjoy that fight a lot. And again, this is another sort of rehash of the movie, but they rehashed the movie in a way that was A, enjoyable, yay, you know, kind of the Halloweentown thing, and B, in a manner that actually had some degree of relevance to the overall plot, which I'm not going to mention. This is kind of funny because they hadn't actually gone anywhere with this, but I'll just say this with terms that you probably don't understand if you've never played this series. Atlantica is the first reference to the Keyblade War. It's the first reference ever to the Keyblade War. That's really funny if you think about it, because the Keyblade War hadn't actually been written yet, as I mentioned much earlier. It was just it was barely even an idea and a concept. It was just something they left here in case they ever wanted to go back to that concept, because and to summarize for what actually they say in literalness, as opposed to symbolism or metaphoric or thematic, is the idea that the Keyblade can bring ruin. The idea that and that also gave us the idea, the concept that there are both light and dark Keyblades. And we are left wondering a very interesting question. Which one are we wielding? I'll mention that later too. Neverland was awesome, in my opinion. The guy who played Captain Hook... Well, okay, first of all, the writers did a perfect job with Captain Hook. He should always be that perfect blend of threatening, silly, and hilarious. Because... you know, he's this, I can't do the voice at all, but the guy who did the voice was doing a brilliant job. But he really does need to be just as horrible as he is hilarious, and they do a really good job of that. I also want to make an aside that say the flight mechanic worked really well too. I just mentioned the 3D thing. And the Phantom, who you fight here, the super optional, well, one of the optional bosses, I'm sorry, who you fight here was a really well-designed optional boss, given the fact that it was done fully in 3D with the flight mechanic and the whole stopping mechanic. It was very, very well done. I very much enjoyed the Phantom fight here. Just thought I'd mention that. I also like Kurt Ziza. I just didn't really have anything else to add to that. However, before I talk about the obvious thing, I want to talk about the subtle thing. In Neverland, Riku makes another appearance, and it's another step in his character arc and the overall plot. Again, Neverland is very relevant to the main plot. It very much feels like it was written from the beginning, you know what I mean? And this is when Riku pulls a shadow out of Sora, and you end up fighting him in the course of the game. A pseudo-heartless shadow Sora thing that will later on become used again in Kingdom Hearts 2. A question I don't hear a lot of people ask is, where did that come from? Given what we know about Sora throughout the course of the series, which I will talk about towards the end of this video, it would not actually surprise me if that was not just a construct, basically. That was not just Riku, turning Sora's shadow into a construct that then fight him. That was basically him pulling some of the darkness out of Sora's heart and manifesting it in a manner that would actually basically be a pseudo Heartless for all intents and purposes. Not a full Heartless, obviously, because that doesn't happen yet, but a pseudo Heartless, a semi Heartless, if you understand where I'm going with this. And that's important for several reasons, not the least of which to demonstrate A, there is darkness in Sora's heart. B, Riku doesn't have total control over the Heartless. But also, there's another theory here, C, which kind of contradicts what I was just saying, and at the same time complements it. In other words, that wasn't a pseudo-Heartless, that was simply darkness. In other words, that Riku doesn't have control over the Heartless like so many of the other villains do. He has control over the darkness. And that is so much more, and that is so much more impacting, so much more relevant, so much more important, and becomes such a bigger thing, especially throughout the course of the series. I personally tend to lean myself towards that theory, that what he did is he pulled some of Sora's darkness out and didn't make it into a Heartless. He made it into, Sora's darkness, which was then defeated. But that's just me. And I'm probably reading too much into things, because that's what I do. One last point before I really get into the story, because we've kind of been leaving it alone, honestly. Winnie-the-Pooh. Winnie-the-Pooh. Winnie-the-Pooh in Kingdom Hearts 1 was simultaneously done perfectly and absolutely wrong. The writing was spot on. All the characters were written and voice acted how they should be. Exactly how they should be. It very much was Winnie-the-Pooh. You know, you could tell that was Winnie-the-Pooh. They were acting just like themselves, just like they should be. Everything was spot on. Brilliantly done. Loved it. However, Winnie-the-Pooh involves a lot of minigames. I haven't really talked about the minigames much, nor will I, other than this one point here. The minigames in Kingdom Hearts 1 in general kinda suck, and nowhere more so than here. Oh my god, I wanted to kill myself every time I played those frickin' minigames in the Winnie-the-Pooh section. They were terrible. They were poorly designed, irritating, frustrating as hell. It was exactly what difficulty shouldn't be, aka frustrating. And I'm not going to talk anymore about it because I don't feel like it. I've only done all of the minigames once. Well, twice actually. Once the first time and then the second time when I did the 100% run. And I'm never doing them again, ever. Let's move on. Then we hit Hollow Bastion. As I've said before, Hollow Bastion's kind of where the game starts, and that's because every one of the previous worlds has been relatively small in terms of both size and how long it takes to go through them. And, with the exception of a few worlds, the story and the plot has only been inching forward. The moment we hit Hollow Bastion, everything hits into full gear. Hollow Bastion is pretty much non-stop story, all things considered. Just tons and tons of exposition, plot, cutscene, character development, everything. And development of the setting, as we find out that Hollow Bastion used to be the world that the Final Fantasy characters lived on prior to Maleficent nearly destroying it. And that's so very Maleficent, by the way. But I'd also just like to take a moment as an aside and say that I love the fact that they picked, of all the Disney villains they could choose from to be the big one in Kingdom Hearts series, they chose Maleficent. I mention that because she kinda sucked as a villain, all things considered, in Sleeping Beauty, if you really think about it. But if you look at her outside of Sleeping Beauty, if you just were shown a picture of her and heard her voice, she does very much suit the idea of the classic Type 1, you know, darkness-related villain, doesn't she? And they do that really, really, really well in Kingdom Hearts 1. She comes across as genuinely menacing, genuinely powerful, genuinely, you know, everything. It is very well done, and I love what they did with Maleficent in Kingdom Hearts 1. She's had several cutscenes up until this point that I haven't really mentioned, just because I wanted to mention it here. They really did an awesome job with Maleficent, and very much props on that. I like the fact that she's the big Disney villain, for all intents and purposes, throughout the whole series. So Maleficent, the visual design, the audio design, the aesthetic of Hollow Bastion is basically perfect. You need to look it up. You need to see it to really understand what I mean. But okay, first of all, you start off on these waterfalls, and you look up, and as you go up, you see in the distance just nothing. There's nothing left. It's just this empty, hollow world because almost all of the world was consumed when the Heartless came. But Maleficent specifically kept her castle, the Bastion itself, and the castle itself is fascinating because it's like part construct, part, you know, standard Disney fantasy castle, and it's part kind of organic, hollowed out. And if you look at it, it's actually a perfect metaphor for what Kingdom Hearts is. It is a combination of the serious with the Disney, with the, you know, with the Final Fantasy thing. It's the amalgamation that Kingdom Hearts is demonstrated visually within the design of that castle. And below the castle, there's this hollow, empty void of whatever was there before. That's just this, you know, you're walking on this water that doesn't look like it actually has any bottom to it, and you're going through these empty cavernous sections. And if you look at the art design, you see that there's just this vast empty space beneath the castle, and it's, oh god, it's beautiful. It's really well done. This is also our one and basically only shot at looking at a world that has been partially consumed by the Heartless rather than fully. Now, the usage of Beast is fascinating here. I'm going to mention this only in brief, even though this deserves more talking upon, but I like the idea of the usage of Beast here because A, it shows the possibility of travel between worlds, even those who are unequipped, if you are sufficiently motivated. Riku himself actually does this earlier from Neverland, from the ship, just before this. And two, well, honestly, I kind of wish we had actually seen Beast's castle in Kingdom Hearts 1. I think that they've actually added the beginning of the Beast storyline here. Well, okay, they did, obviously, but if they'd done it differently, that we could see the beginning of where Beast's story arc would go, because Beast actually does have a story arc, believe it or not, which is mostly explored in 2, but also mentioned in 358. Namely, the idea that someone is not evil, again, but will fall into darkness simply because of his own emotional turmoil. And I would have liked to see that begun here in Kingdom Hearts 1 rather than just have him be going after Belle. But whatever, that's a minor thing. He was still well used in this. I also really, really, really love this scene. Okay. This is where we first learn... okay, I'm not even sure where to start with this. I love the scene between Sora and Riku. Now, Riku is pretty much full-on giving in to the darkness at this point. He's not there yet. He will be shortly. But it's kind of showing in his attitude, all things considered, because he's always been leaning that way in general. And he... When he tosses the wooden sword at Sora, he does it with such condescension. Because, as we learn here, the Keyblade that is being wielded at the moment, the Kingdom Key, was always supposed to be Riku's. However, Riku's heart was weak when it was going to be given to him, so Sora ended up taking it instead. For various reasons, which I'm not even going to begin to go into, probably not in this whole video even. The interesting thing about that is that... Well, okay. God, I have so many things to talk about this. Let's start with how this is the first time we start to see the what is arguably the biggest theme of the entire series, and that is the strength of the heart, or hearts, actually, would be more accurate. Sora has just gone through all these adventures and done all these things, and fought his way here, and he learns that he is not actually the Keyblade Master, and his friends, Donald and Goofy, have just abandoned him. And he is left with a wooden sword. Now, Beast still wants to go after Belle. And Sora looks at Beast, and in that he realizes that he has a choice. He can give up, or he can keep going. And so he picks up a wooden sword and keeps going. And again, beautiful example of gameplay and story integration. You actually fight with the wooden sword for this first section of Hollow Bastion. And it's awesome in its brutality. Because you have a frickin' wooden sword in one of the most concentrated places of Heartless and in the entire setting at the moment. That works out really well, all things considered. And then you have the next scene where you encounter Riku. And Sora basically confronts him and says something that sounds a little cheesy. Probably because it is. But I like because it emphasizes, again, that theme of Kingdom Hearts in general, and it speaks to the nature of Sora, which I will not be discussing in this video. His words are, almost direct quote, if you'll forgive me, "My friends are my power." And so even as Riku is ready to strike him down, shoot him down actually, Sora is prepared to fight him back, even though all he has is a wooden sword, and even though Beast has abandoned him. He is ready to fight this, and Goofy runs forward and helps defend him, and Donald runs forward and helps defend him, and Sora gets the Keyblade back, and then ends up defeating Riku, and Riku runs. Now, the reason he got the Keyblade back is because, even though it was originally intended to be Riku's, Sora's heart was stronger. But Sora's heart was not stronger in a vacuum, if you understand what I mean. Sora was not just, I'm all over 9,000 heart. No, he had the connection of the other hearts to strengthen his own. That's one of the things I actually do like about Sora, even though I generally don't like the character, especially in 2. He is not only a character who does not operate in a vacuum, but he is well aware of that fact, and he knows that he depends on others in order to be able to keep going the way he does. I also love this scene for 2 big reasons. One, it demonstrates Riku's greatest downfall, and one of the reasons why he falls so hard in this first game, is pride. More than anything else, Riku has always pushed himself to be the best, because he was the best. And this is one of the first times it's really been shoved right in his face that he isn't, that someone is better than him. And you'll notice immediately after this is when he finally falls. I'll get to that in just a moment. But 2, and far more importantly, I've heard some people complain about Donald and Goofy in the series. I not only have no problem with them, I love Donald and Goofy within the Kingdom Hearts series. I mean this sincerely. And I absolutely love the fact that Donald and Goofy and Sora are not just friends. They are basically nakama, if I'm using the word correctly. Forgive me, my Japanese is not fantastic. They are in it for the long haul. And I love that because even though they started off basically strangers, you don't go through as much stuff as they've gone through together without forming some kind of bond one with another. You just don't. That's not how that works. As you two work together, as you three actually work together and bond and working together, you know, it's the Three Musketeers thing. They even reference this in the game, the Three Musketeer things, all for one and one for all. That really is where it's at, and this was the biggest example of this. Goofy and Donald, who are incredibly loyal to King Mickey, deliberately disobey King Mickey's orders because their friendship and their connection with Sora is more important to them. If you'll forgive me for quoting Star Trek VI, of all things, even though this actually didn't make it into the script of the movie, if I ever had to choose between betraying my country or betraying my friend, I hope to God I have the guts to betray my country. I've always enjoyed that concept. If used right, if used properly, that emphasizes how important the bonds of fellowship that people can have can be. And I like that they show that so powerfully with this scene between, of all characters, Donald, Goofy, and Sora. Love that. Now... Oh, God, I've got so much else to talk about this thing. Okay, let's... Hang on, I gotta read my notes here. Give me just a moment. I just went off on a bit of a tangent there with that scene. Forgive me. Oh! This is also an excellent point to bring up something else. The one big, true, massive, huge difference between Sora and Riku is that Sora had Donald and Goofy. Now, I mean this very sincerely. Sora and Riku both ended up getting sucked away by the darkness, plopped out somewhere where they had no idea what was going on, and they were cast aside and lost and all that horrible stuff, right? Through sheer circumstance, Riku ends up with Maleficent. That doesn't work out well. But Sora ends up with Donald and Goofy. Now, I say Riku ends up with Maleficent, but I'm actually going to ignore that for the point, because ultimately he doesn't actually have anyone, is my point. Riku is, for all intents and purposes, operating in a vacuum. And Sora is not. It is extremely likely that things would have gone completely differently, and indeed much, much, much worse, if Sora did not have the backing, the help, the support of Donald and Goofy. If he did not have his friend, or at least his people who would become his friends, helping him along the way, it is very likely he would have fallen just as bad and just as hard as Riku did if he didn't have someone supporting him the whole way. And again, another major theme of the thing. But I love that because it really does show that Riku and Sora ultimately are not actually all that different from each other. Not when it comes down to it. Riku takes himself much more seriously than Sora does, as we especially see this later in, like, say, 2 and DDD. But ultimately, both of them have the same problems, both of them have the same issues with their emotions and with taking care of themselves, you know, the same flaws, in other words. And both of them have darkness in their hearts. Now, I'm going to use that to segue into just talking about something very interesting to me. Some people assumed that Sora was just, you know, the avatar of light or whatever. That's actually not true. That's Mickey, by the way. Mickey is the avatar of light for all intents and purposes. But Sora does, in fact, have darkness in his heart. And he has light. I'm debating if I really want to talk about this here or not. I'm actually not going to. I'm going to move ahead further. Forgive me. I'll talk about that later. Let's talk about Maleficent. This is where we really start to see Maleficent be stretched out as a character. And we learn that she is... this is actually a very important plot point, all things considered. It's what I like to call the "you're an idiot" syndrome. and I mean this sincerely. Best example I could ever come up with is the Alien series, the movie series. Weyland Yutani, you're idiots. The idea here is the concept behind seeing something horribly powerful and awful and you know, basically mindless, basically bestial, and saying, I want to control that for my own ends. About 90% of the time, that doesn't end well, especially in fiction. And Maleficent, for all her power, for all her knowledge, for all her composure, we are shown in this just how little control she actually had, and how much of a pawn of the Heartless she really was. Even though, again, you know, you're an idiot. You were trying to control this vast, powerful force for your own ends, thinking you were in charge the whole time. No. You were nothing more than another stepping stone for them. They probably barely even acknowledge you. You know, as much as a Heartless can acknowledge anyone. This is also... well, okay. This is also where we truly learn the importance of the Princesses of Heart, which will be more important throughout the rest of the series. And quite a few very important events happen with regards to Kyrie and Sora and Riku. At this point, we're basically in full spoiler mode, by the way. This is the big twist of Kingdom Hearts I'm about to spoil for you. So, you have now been warned if you care. Throughout this game, we've been receiving these things called Ansem reports, and we learned that Ansem was a kind and wise leader who was in charge of the Final Fantasy world once upon a time, and he was also a researcher. He was researching, you know, the Heartless and the Darkness. Well, turns out that Ansem, the Seeker of Darkness, is in fact the villain. This is when we first... well, we've actually met him before, but this is when he finally reveals himself. He tells Riku, who has just had his pride brutally destroyed by Sora, all you have to do in order to truly become darkness is to fully accept the darkness. Now, while there is a degree of truth to that statement, Ansem was lying completely to him, and Ansem used Riku's acceptance of the darkness to take over his body, because Ansem had abandoned his body in order to be able to travel the worlds freely and without fear. He was effectively just a function of darkness. So at this point, Ansem finally starts to talk. Boy, he loves to monologue too, doesn't he? I love it though. They do this wonderful effect where the voice actor who plays Riku and the voice actor who plays Ansem, who at this point was Billy Zane, who was awesome, are both talking over all his lines simultaneously. And because he's Ansem, he knows a lot of things that everyone else doesn't. He is also the one who reveals where Kyrie's heart has been this entire time. In Sora. It has been hiding in Sora. That's also something that will become relevant later for reasons I will not go into in this video, but suffice it to say, this is where everything starts to really fragment as far as the entire series goes. I don't mean fragment in a bad way. I mean, like, this is where the dominoes really start to fall in this scene. Because Sora ends up fighting Riku, Ansem, whatever, beats him, and then takes the Keyblade, uses it on himself with a smile, by the way, which was actually really awesome, I thought, because that's been a recurring theme throughout the whole thing. Yeah, no sad faces. And so he uses the Keyblade on himself to unlock the hearts, plural, within him. This is a bit of a spoil for later, but I cannot mention this without saying this. There are actually 3 hearts. Possibly more, but 3 we are definite about that were within Sora as of this point in time. I'm not going to mention what the third one was, but I'll talk about that more later. But his own heart and Kyrie's heart, right? Now, Kyrie's heart is released, returns to her, and she gets up just in time to see Sora vanish as his heart is disintegrated. Or his body is disintegrated with the loss of his heart, creating Sora's Heartless. If we ever had any doubt that there was darkness in Sora's heart, that has been obliterated because he became a Heartless. The reason Kyrie didn't become a Heartless was because she had 0 darkness in her heart. That's also going to be important. What follows is what I consider one of the most awesome parts of the whole game, where you play Sora as a Heartless, just a dinky little plain old Heartless, hopping around in the cutest manner possible through Bastion as you follow the party. And then what ends up happening is Kyrie shares a bit of her own heart back to Sora in order to reconstruct Sora as an actual person. All of those events I just mentioned are going to shape the events of the next 3 games. I'm not kidding. That's all I'm going to mention now. Now, let's see here. Anything else I want to mention here? Blah, 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 blah. Let's go ahead and skip forward just a little bit, because that's basically the end of the Hollow Bastion thing. But I want to mention one thing that I really like, the, again, gameplay story integration. One of the things that happens following this is Ansem has opened up the door to darkness, basically. He has made a portal straight through to the end of the world, actually. And this has just unleashed Heartless everywhere. And this is true in game too. You can go to every world throughout the course of the game, and they have bigger and stronger and more Heartless than they did before. It's a minor thing, and it doesn't really have much to do with the story other than what I already, other than the obvious. But I like it because it is very much, again, story gameplay integration. Everywhere is being swarmed by Heartless, not just in story, but in actuality. I like that. Let's talk about the end of the world. The end of the world is absolutely incredible. One of my favorite last dungeons ever. It is beautiful. Beautiful. I'm sorry, I don't have words for it. I really don't. It is a perfect visual and audio demonstration of what the end of the world is, which is... it's actually better described as a nobody of worlds, but since you may not know what that term yet means yet, let me just simply say that when the Heartless eat a world, there are bits and pieces of that world left over. Hollow Bastion was an example of one of those pieces being kept in one spot. But in this case, in most cases, in most all the cases, those bits and pieces are all dragged here to the core of darkness, which is where the end of the world sits, and kind of shoved together into this amalgamation world, which is what the end of the world is. It is the combination of all the dead bits of the worlds that the Heartless have consumed. And it looks like it. All kinds of looks like it. And it sounds like it. And the music is incredible. And the combat is incredible. And it's almost... I've mentioned before how I don't like weird for weird's sake. But I do like weird for a good sake, for symbolic sake. Everything in the end of the world looks very stylized and very artistic and very, whatever other word you want to use here. But it is all done in the emphasis of explaining what and how this place is, and it is extremely well done. One of the things I want to also mention, I know I haven't really talked about nobodies yet, but the contrast between the world that never was and the end of the world is incredible, and this also is true for the 2 planet bosses, because the nobodies are intellect. They follow the mind, so they are very artificial looking. It is very robotic, very constructed looking. The Heartless are all instinct because they're following the heart, and so everything here is very organic, very fluid, very morphic, very down to earth, whatever you want to call it. So everything here looks very much like that, and that also emphasizes what the Heartless really are. Again, basically just pure instinct and nothing else. There's something else that I know some people have actually missed in the end of the world, so I thought I'd mention it here. There are tiny, dinky little references to Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, Beauty and the Beast, and Snow White. I mention those because all of those worlds have, in fact, been consumed by the Heartless in Kingdom Hearts 1. And you do see tiny little bits and pieces of them in the end of the world, so nice touch there. The final scene with Ansem is absolutely amazing. I mean, yes, the monologue is great, and yes, it's showing off Billy Zane's final voice, wonderful voice talent, but it really does emphasize his mindset and his mentality beautifully, because this is going to sound really weird, but in Kingdom Hearts 1, we get the distinct impression that Ansem is nowhere near as evil as many of the other characters we've seen before, including Maleficent herself. That Ansem really does genuinely believe what he says about, darkness is the heart's true essence, and all hearts are born from darkness, and so must all hearts end. Everything he says there, he speaks very specifically, and his word choice is very concrete, and you get the general impression that he really does think everything should be dissolved into darkness. That's the way things should be. Now, we do know, thanks to the rest of the series, that that is actually not what he is saying, so it is possible he was just monologuing for the sake of monologuing, or it is possible that he just... Well, I'll talk about the other aspect of what it's possible later, but suffice it to say that within the confines of Kingdom Hearts 1, it was an excellent peek into the mindset of the main villain, who we've basically barely seen throughout this whole thing. The final fights were pretty fun, not too hard, but I do love the significance of the first few final fights happening on Destiny Islands. I'm going to go ahead and say why here, even though this is a spoiler. The gentleman that Ansem, the Seeker of Darkness, is, or was, I should say, before he became, the ultimate Heartless, he's from Destiny Islands. He was born there. And so, having the final fight between Ansem, who is from Destiny Islands, and Sora, who is from Destiny Islands, and that's also where the game began, and now where the game ends. You get where I'm going with this. Again, this is both obvious and subtle symbolism all in the same thing. I do like the book ending of having it there. I will also mention that they used excellent use of the lighting effects during several of the final battles, because so much of the areas where, you're in darkness, it actually looks kind of light, all things considered. There's plenty of lighting, there's plenty of gray, you can still see what's going on. However, for several sections of the final battle, it gets genuinely dark to the point where you can barely see where you're going, and all you can see is the Heartless the Heartless's eyes, actually, because you can't even see the Heartless running around. That was really well done, and really got across the emphasis of just how far into the darkness you have fallen at this point. Now, in my opinion, Kingdom Hearts 1 arguably has the least tragic ending of the Kingdom Hearts series. The whole series of Kingdom Hearts is a tragedy. I've never heard anyone argue with me on this, and I will talk about more of that as the videos progress. But in Kingdom Hearts 1, we have a bittersweet ending. So let's do a quick roll call here, okay? After we defeat Ansem, the Seeker of Darkness, the door to darkness is closed. Oh, by the way, we also get a peek in through the door of darkness, and we see that on the other side, it's even worse. That is the realm of darkness on the other side of that. In other words, if you're paying attention, by the way, we are the whole time we've been doing this at the end of the world, we're actually not in the darkness per se. Yes, that's right. We haven't even actually been in the darkness yet. We have been at the terminus point. Excuse my yawning. We've been at the terminus point, in between light and dark. And as we look through the door, we see the actual realm of darkness on the other side. Riku is already over there, because that's kind of what happened to his body after Ansem was defeated and, lost it, basically. And Mickey is over there. Now, Mickey can handle the realm of darkness because he is the Avatar of Light. Riku, a little more worried about him, but we end up having to close the door to the realm of darkness because... Duh, we have to. We have to close the portal between the realm of darkness and the light, or else one will flood into the other and bad things may happen. So we end up sealing Riku and Mickey in the realm of darkness. Sora, Donald, after that, the realms, the worlds reconstitute themselves from the pieces, and everywhere goes back to where it should have been previously. All those worlds are reconstructed from the ashes, so to speak. And Sora, Donald, and Goofy are left to realm in what we find out later is actually known as the In-Between Realm. Completely by themselves, with no idea where they're going or what they're doing, other than, Pluto showing up, which doesn't really mean much. Kyrie is left to go back to her world, now that they've all reverted. And there's the very distinct impression that she and, Sora and everyone else, and Riku, the three of them will never actually see each other ever again. And it is very possible that, all three of these main groups of people will just be gone forever. And I do say this is bittersweet, because it's not actually a bad ending. It's not a tragic ending like some of them are. But long story short, there's a lot to be sad about during this victory at the end of Kingdom Hearts 1. Ugh. And again, this is the most happiest, quote-unquote, ending of the Kingdom Hearts series, in my opinion. Now, Kingdom Hearts 1 really begins the light and dark dynamic, which will be explored later and explored pretty much in every single game of the Kingdom Hearts series. It's one of the primary themes of the series. Not the dichotomy, actually. The dynamic between the three sides. Yes, three, by the way. I've been talking about it this whole time. I'm finally going to start talking about it. But the primary motivational theme of Kingdom Hearts 1 is very strongly, very clearly darkness. Kingdom Hearts 1 is all about the darkness side of the three. It doesn't fully explore the darkness, per se, but it does touch the surface, most especially with all the Disney villains we saw, Maleficent herself, Ansem, the Seeker of Darkness, Riku, Sora, Kyrie, and Mickey. You see, Ansem, the Seeker of Darkness, was the one true individual who truly had power over not just the Heartless, but the darkness. We find out more about why that is later, but the impression we get now is very simply the fact that he truly, utterly believed in the ideal, the mentality, the concept of darkness. He was not like Maleficent, who saw it as a tool, and thus, herself did not have control. He sees it as a destiny, as a manifest destiny, if you'll forgive me. And so he can control it because he is effectively a part of it. He is on its side as much as it is on his side. Now, Riku, by contrast, the whole game, it's very obvious that Riku is darkness. He's on the darkness side of things. But Riku is not an evil person. I've mentioned this before, that we see examples of the darkness and the Heartless, affecting people who are not evil. Riku is not evil. Prideful, certainly. But we do see his good side. We do also see that once he realizes the true extent of what has been happening and how badly he's fallen, he turns around instantly. The very next thing we see after his fall of Riku is him telling everyone else they need to run and holding back Ansem, the Seeker of Darkness, while they flee, because he understands just how badly he's screwed up and he wants to fix this right now. And so, Riku is by no means a bad person. Quite the contrary. He is very much the hero mentality. And again, I mentioned that I wonder if Donald and Goofy had been with him the whole time, how things would have turned out, But Riku is the biggest and strongest example of darkness is not evil throughout the entire Kingdom Hearts series. He himself, if you'll forgive me for skipping ahead a bit, in Kingdom Hearts 2, explains the darkness is not evil thing in the best way possible, because a certain individual asks him and Mickey, why do you hate the darkness? Mickey can't give a satisfactory answer to that, because he doesn't hate the darkness. He just, there's so many things in the darkness he doesn't like. It is Riku who gives the satisfactory answer. It is Riku who actually tells him it's not the darkness itself, it's the things that hide inside of it. I've mentioned before that Kingdom Hearts and Star Wars, believe it or not, Star Wars as it should be, not Star Wars as it is now, have very much similarities between their light and dark dichotomy. In other words, in the fact that they basically aren't a dichotomy. That the darkness is not necessarily evil, and the light is not necessarily good. And that evil will tend towards darkness because darkness is quicker and easier, and good will tend towards light because light takes more effort and more strength of heart, that kind of a thing. But that does not make either light or darkness evil or good. And Riku is one of our best examples of that. I'm going to skip over Sora for just a second. Kyrie is, again, pure light. Definitely the light side of the trio, of the triad. Riku's the darkness. Kyrie is, without question, the light. She had no darkness in her heart. She didn't even make a Heartless. She just left behind a puppet body that had nothing left other than, the body after she lost her heart. Even though it should have, certain other things should have happened to it. Including her becoming a Heartless, like which happened to Sora. She is also kind of, how do I put this? We only see the various edges of this. This becomes more fleshed out as the game series goes on. But we see the edges of the I'm not just here to be rescued mentality. She's not just the female, please come rescue me kind of person. She actually will do things of her own volition and try her best to contribute as she goes. With the degree to which she succeeds on that, who knows, but not to spoil anything, but for those of you who know what I'm talking about, let's just say I'm looking forward to seeing her in Kingdom Hearts 3. Finally, we have Sora. Sora is, in my opinion, based on all the evidence throughout the entire series, without question, the in-between. There's light, that's Kyrie, there's darkness, that's Riku, and then there's the in-between. The person who straddles both light and darkness. The person who is gray, if you'll forgive me for putting such a label onto it. Sora is the gray of the trio, and that is why he so easily can use the Keyblade of Darkness, the Kingdom Key, and becomes a Heartless, and still fights for the Championing of Light, but is so easily affected by the darkness, but at the same time is so easily manipulated by the forces of light, too, and for bad, I might add. That happens more in the later games, but I just thought I'd mention it here, because between the three of the characters, we do have the full triad, and this will be true later as well. We'll see another triad further in the series, which I'll get to later. The final thing I want to mention here is the Keyblade of Darkness thing I just mentioned. This is semi-confirmed, but mostly still theory, but long story short, it is very widely considered that the Keyblade that, the Kingdom Key, the key that Sora ends up using and Riku briefly uses, is in fact the Keyblade of Darkness, the Keyblade of Darkness. It would make perfect sense to me that someone like Sora could use that, first of all, but also that that was originally supposed to be Riku's key. It'd also make perfect sense that that is not the Keyblade that Mickey ends up using, because Mickey ends up using the Keyblade of Light, which he finds in the realm of darkness. It also makes perfect sense to me in a very yin-yang sort of way that the Keyblade of Light would be in the realm of darkness, just as the Keyblade of Darkness would be in the realm of light. The significance of that can be debated. It may or may not actually matter at all. But I mainly mention it because someone who is in between using a blade of darkness with the intent to do light, well, if you'll forgive me for the quote, can bring either good or ruin, just like they talk about here in Kingdom Hearts 1, and just as will be mentioned later when we finally start talking about the Keyblade War. So I still think that's going to have its own significance in Kingdom Hearts 3, personally. Final thoughts. There's a lot about this series that can be analyzed. There's actually a huge amount of complexity, depth, and subtlety, both to the literalness and the symbology and the symbolism and the themes of this series that can be delved into. It's one of the reasons I've been so hesitant to really start these videos, is because it takes a lot of planning and thought and analysis, and I've been very tired and sick and in pain lately. But my ultimate point in bringing all that up is that it is my opinion that that complexity, that depth, is one of the reasons Kingdom Hearts has the longevity that it has. That people like me don't just play it because it's got a cool combat system and because there's a cool factor, or because it's got Disney in it, or because it's got Final Fantasy in it. We play it because the story is wonderfully convoluted, loops in on itself, and despite everything, at least from what we know so far, doesn't actually have any plot holes. There are a few minor ones, but as far as the major plot points, as the characters and the overall arcing plot, there are no actual plot holes throughout it. It is very concretely made, and that is because, as I mentioned, once Kingdom Hearts 1 was an extreme success that sold incredibly well, they went ahead and sat down and wrote the rest of the series. As one, before they even made the next game, they're like, we need to write everything out, and then we'll make the games as we go. Because in my opinion, that is the proper way to do things. The Babylon 5 method, if you'll forgive me for calling it that. I know I've referenced that before. So very many kinds of awesome here that they actually did that, and that they've kept it going, and that the series has been going in the way it has. And the final thing I want to mention, I'm glad that we're finally getting Kingdom Hearts Final Mix here in the States, a decade later. But one of the biggest thing I hate about the Kingdom Hearts series is the fact that there seems to be this strange elitism, because I can't explain it any other way, in the attitude of whether or not people should get the Kingdom Hearts series outside of Japan. Why is it, if you'll forgive me for asking, that, here we are with a series that sells like crazy over here, and then you do a final mix of Kingdom Hearts 1 and Kingdom Hearts 2 and Birth by Sleep, and all of these final mixes don't just add awesome gameplay stuff. They don't just add new content. They add more story. They are, in fact, part of canon. The parts of the story they add are part of canon. We are missing... It's like if you were watching a television show, just insert whatever show you want, one that has a very concrete storyline, like, Battlestar Galactica or Babylon 5 or whatever. And you just don't get to see some episodes, because those episodes were only released in Japan, and we don't get those here in the States. I have never understood that mentality, and I never will. And it's nice that we're finally getting Kingdom Hearts 1 Final Mix out here. But I would really love to just go over there and look at them and say, what is wrong with you people? Why haven't you been releasing these over here this entire time? Just anywhere. Not just in Japan. I'm not just trying to say release them in the States. Why are you just... Because that's not the problem. They're just releasing them in Japan. That's the problem. Why aren't you releasing these elsewhere as well? I'll stop. I'll stop. It's just... That has been pissing me off for years upon years upon years. Especially Kingdom Hearts 2's Final Mix, which not only added a ton of awesome cutscenes, but a ridiculous amount of additional content as far as gameplay goes. Anyways. That's all I got. Kingdom Hearts 1. Awesome game. I do hope you enjoyed. I have no idea how good or bad this video was because I've been only kind of half with it this whole time. I'm going to go get some food and stuff, and I guess you don't care about that fact, so I will talk to you guys later.